Hello and welcome to Reporters, the show that brings you some of our best stories from France 24 reporters around the world. This week, we stay right here in France. You may remember more than 3 years ago, the country was shocked by the violent death of a young French Jew, Ilan Halimi. The young man died after being kidnapped and heavily tortured by a gang for 3 weeks on end. It all happened not far from Paris in a suburban low-income housing project. The self-styled Barbarian gang had failed to get the ransom demanded of Halimi's family, whom they had thought to be rich just because he was Jewish. Youssouf Fofana, accused of the planning of the operation, was later arrested in the Ivory Coast, to where he had fled. The gruesome stories making the headlines again here in France. The trial of the Barbarian gang and its leader, Youssouf Fofana, is set to begin in Paris on April 29th. Our reporter Karim Akiki went to La Pierre Plate, the housing project south of Paris, where Ilan was held captive and tortured without anyone noticing anything. Let's watch his report.
3 semaines de séquestration et de torture avec au bout la mort. On a déjà beaucoup parlé du drame d'Ilan Halimi, enlevé pour des motifs crapuleux, peut-être teinté d'antisémitisme.
The Jewish community is in shock. All of France is in shock.
What we have here is anti-Semitism by association. Let's not split hairs here.
On February the 13th, 2006, Ilan Halimi was found almost lifeless in front of this railway station. The young mobile phone salesman had been tortured before being burnt alive. His captors went by the name of the Barbarian gang. Their leader, Youssouf Fofana, a minor gangster 24 years old and just released from prison. He targeted Ilan Halimi because he was Jewish, and for him, Jewish meant rich. Fofana recruited some 20 youths from this housing estate in Bagneux. It was on the 3rd story of this building where he was held for 24 days without anyone in the neighbourhood noticing a thing. 3 years after the incident, the subject of the Barbarian gang is off limits. Some of the torturers were the same age as these youngsters. Can you tell me what happened here?
I don't really know what happened. I just heard about all that.
What did you hear about?
That there was a Jew, I don't know.
Can you tell me what happened here?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Oh, we never talked about that.
Don't talk to the camera.
Honestly, I don't want any trouble with the Bagneux guys.
He won't say any more. A law of silence still reigns here. Philippe Coanet has seen all the youngsters of this estate grow up over the last 20 years. At the time of Ilan's kidnapping, he was the head of the area's youth centre. After Ilan's death, the youth workers decided to react as best they could. They made available to the residents of the estate something they call a word box.
I think it's not nice to be racist, but I think we should make peace and respect others.
A few words on paper. It's important work, but not in itself enough. This youth worker never imagined such an incident could happen here. Today, Philippe knows that it could easily happen again.
Last year, we were putting on, here in the centre, a group whose leader is a young kid from Bagneux. And we learned there was a video of him going around on the internet. One of the lines in his song was, "We're going to put you in a cellar and do to you what Youssouf Fofana did." As soon as we found out, we called the youngster in. We immediately took the group off the programme and we made sure they understood why. But what struck me was we took this kid aside to explain it to him. And I mean explain, not negotiate. We spoke to him for an hour and a half, and I think he went off without having taken in a single word we said.
Another person who knows the local kids well is the parish priest of Bagneux. After Ilan's death, he painted with residents this mural. Their way of denouncing intolerance, racism and anti-Semitism.
We can see people there together. Beyond that, we can imagine what we like, but there's a bit of every generation in it.
Father Pugnier has ministered here for 10 years. He knows everyone in the area and would often meet one of Ilan's captors, an unremarkable youngster who got good grades at school.
Pour l'un d'entre eux, c'est quelqu'un qui était...
One of them was a kid who came from Martinique or Guadeloupe. I can't remember which.
Et c'est vrai que j'ai le sentiment
and I think living here was quite easy for him.
Ce qu'il a dû vivre ici, c'était un peu une certaine facilité de...
There weren't too many restrictions here.
Pas trop de limites à ce niveau-là.
The youngster and his family attended Sunday Mass in the parish church. Parishioners too say they never saw anything. How could some 15 youths from this estate get caught up in such an affair? The parish priest of Bagneux still asks himself that question.
La cité a été pointée du doigt. Après,
fingers were pointed at the neighborhood. After the feeling of outright failure we felt, I wondered what we could have done.
Qu'est-ce qu'on aurait pu faire?
I tried to do what I can in my own way. The youth centre tries to do what it can in its way. The local mission does what it can. Anyone who has regular contact with the young people do what they can. But the sense of failure persists.
Ce sentiment d'échec continue.
A few minutes from the church, Bagneux synagogue. To pay tribute to Ilan at the time of his death, the town's Jewish community planted a tree where Ilan's body was found. Ilan in Hebrew means tree. The maple has since been replanted in the garden of the synagogue.
On the
first anniversary of his death, we organised, along with the municipal council, a demonstration in memory of him. And this tree is a symbol of what Ilan stood for.
Before Ilan's death, everyone in Bagneux, Christian, Jewish and Muslim, lived together in peace. They would often meet together, but since the Barbarian gang affair, there is less and less contact between the communities.
There were lots of meetings, quite a few before the tragedy. There are less now, but we still have good relations with the Muslim community here in Bagneux. I don't think the anti-Semitism comes from them. It's an individual thing.
Back at La Pierre Plate, this may be a public housing estate, but it's no ghetto. Here people know one another and tend the gardens at the foot of their building. The locals may not have seen anything, but the Fofana affair still weighs heavily around here.
I think it was terrible what happened. It's true, you have to think about it. What if that happened to our children? What would we say?
There are few locals who want anything to do with the Barbarian gang. Claudette wants to show us that living in this neighbourhood is good. She has long cultivated tomatoes on this allotment, right opposite the apartment where Ilan was held captive.
It's particularly painful because it happened right on our doorstep and we never knew. That was a really hard blow to take. The act itself was terrible enough, but then you have people saying they didn't know what was going on, although you suspect they actually did.
This retired public servant lives with her husband Emile. For 10 years they've lived on the second floor. Emile himself was also shocked. Every day he looks at the building opposite and still wonders how it all could have happened.
Well, what could we have done? We weren't able to come to the rescue of the poor fellow. Those kids, Fofana, we found out all about that through the media. I didn't have a clue who they were. I don't think I ever laid eyes on them once. You can see how we feel. Powerless.
Gardening is Claudette's preferred means of relaxation. Ever since the Fofana affair, she and Emile like many local residents, have been observed by a municipal psychiatrist. It's a neighbourhood that eagerly awaits the trial.
I want people to understand what happened here and not to tar us all with the same brush. The Barbarian gang wasn't the Bagneux gang.
How could Ilan Halimi have been held captive for 3 weeks without anyone noticing? How could local kids have committed such an act? Questions the residents of La Pierre Plate hope to find answers to at the gang's trial.
Well, the reporter behind this fascinating story is here with us, Ilan Halimi, and thanks for being here. We've seen in your report that people in La Pierre Plate await this trial eagerly. What do you think is likely to happen in the trial?
It's a trial that will last 2 months. It's a trial that will be held in camera because there were 2 minors at the time of the murder. And the trial will focus on the anti-Semitic motive. Did Fofana kidnap Halimi because he was a Jew? That was the initial motive. Fofana said that he had himself chosen Ilan Halimi after going to his store in Paris where he was selling mobile phones, and he realized it was a store run by Jews, and because on the Sabbath day there was nobody. The trial will have to decide if it was an anti-Semitic motive or not. Fofana then retracted his initial statements by saying, no, I didn't kidnap him because he was a Jew. I kidnapped him because I needed money and because I needed somebody who could give me money. So the trial will also have to decide on the responsibility or liability of the 20 accused, including 2 minors. And among the 2 minors, there's a woman, the woman who was the bait who attracted Halimi to be kidnapped. And the last aspect of the trial, the inhabitants of La Pierre Plate wonder how the trial will release their responsibility, because we said for a long time that all members of the neighborhood knew about the trial.
Mm-hmm. You've met people in La Pierre Plate. I mean, we've seen it in your report. What is your sense? I mean, do you think there was indeed something, I mean, this kidnapping had something to do with the fact he was Jewish?
I spent time in
this housing project of La Pierre Plate. It's an ordinary low-income housing project. It isn't a ghetto. The atmosphere is very inward-looking. The inhabitants are shocked by what happened, and they feel guilty because throughout my report, we were asked why. They asked themselves, why didn't we see anything? Some of the media and the police initially said that some inhabitants knew that this kidnapping would take place, so they were passive accomplices, as it were, in the crime. So the inhabitants want to know through the trial if it's true, and at the moment they are angry because they're fed up. They're fed up of people talking about Bagneux and their project through this gang.
Do you think, your sense is that, again, the fact this man, Ilan Halimi, was targeted had something to do with the fact he's Jewish? Or in other words, do you think Fofana and his gang were anti-Semitic?
This is the whole issue of the trial. What we can say is that Ilan Halimi, Fofana, before kidnapping Halimi, had attempted to kidnap other people who were not necessarily Jewish. They were well-known people, high-profile people, a well-known doctor. But the atmosphere doesn't feel anti-Semitic at all. In this housing project, all communities live together in harmony, and that's why it was all the more shocking. Why did Fofana kidnap Ilan Halimi? Why did he take him to that housing project? People are not convinced about the anti-Semitic motive. They're all embarrassed. It may have been there initially. And the second question is, was Ilan Halimi was tortured horribly because he was a Jew? That's a question which we hope the trial will give an answer to.
What's really scary as well is the fact that it could all happen again. I mean, according to the youth worker you talked to in the report, I mean that is the chilling factor about this whole story, isn't it?
Yes. When you visit the neighborhood, you feel the atmosphere, a very special atmosphere, a very specific atmosphere. It can be explained in many ways. The social workers talk about Iraq, what's happening in Iraq, and what's happening in the Near East. And they say that there are a lot of superficial explanations have been given by the media, by satellite television in particular, on the spot. This kind of incident could occur, this kind of tragedy could occur again. A social worker thinks that this kind of accident or incident could occur again. Another young person last year was kidnapped in the same housing project, and fortunately he wasn't killed, but he was tortured, and Dirty Jew was carved on his forehead. So everybody is very vigilant on the spot to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much, Karim, for this very interesting and gruesome story. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Join us again next week for another edition of Reporters. In the meantime, be well.